Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, who's also the publisher of thebreaker.news. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Bob, the Canucks are playing surprisingly well, but perhaps their owners are playing with high sticks in Yaletown. What's happening with their restaurant there?
Well, before we get on to the Elisa restaurant in Yaletown, put into perspective, Canucks fans, curb your enthusiasm. We're not yet out of October. The Canucks are always riding high in the Burr months and sometimes can make it through the Uary months, but when it gets to the Urch and the Ill, there sometimes are urching and the illing. So enjoy it while it lasts. This team does not have high expectations. Again, they've had a good October, and give them a pat in the back for that. But don't start planning a Stanley Cup celebration yet. So, putting that aside, the situation in Yaletown. The Aquilines have a restaurant division, a high-end restaurant division called the Top Table Group. It owns various high-end restaurants around Vancouver. One of them that they opened last year was called the Elisa Steakhouse. It is named after the matriarch of the family, Elisa Aquilini, who died in 2015. She was 82 years old, if I remember correctly. And this is a wood-fired steak restaurant, a high-end restaurant in Yaletown. It occupies the space where Milestones used to be. So it's quite an improvement on the quality of food and also the size of the bill at the end of the night. And like many restaurants and bars in Vancouver, Elisa took advantage of a program from City Hall where they allow you to use public space for an outdoor patio. That's especially helpful during the summer months, but sometimes there are restaurants and bars that run patios year-round. They've got heaters. It's a way to expand the capacity of a restaurant and a bar. It's also a way for the proprietor to earn extra revenue. Of course, extra seats means extra opportunity to bring in the hungry and the thirsty and to sell them food and drink. And that's what the Aquilines did. They applied for and received in summer of last year the approval for this patio in Yaletown at the Elisa Steakhouse on the historic heritage Yaletown loading docks. And they approved it from City Hall, and they agreed upon a design. It was going to be really pretty simple. Some planters denoting the barrier between the public walking area and the space where the tables and chairs were. But what happened next was quite interesting because you had a situation where a City Hall bureaucrat from the very department which handles the patio permitting in Yaletown on that day, late November, and he discovered that there was a structure being built. This wasn't the agreed-upon planters. This was a full-on structure being built to essentially enclose the patio and to make it much more than the temporary setup that it was permitted to be. So he sent a quick email to the people at the Aquilines Top Table Group and said, this isn't as permitted. You better stop construction now. We have the power to pull your permit altogether. And it didn't get shut down. In fact, the construction continued into January, and that's when more photos were taken of the site and showing that it was near completion, this enclosed patio area in Yaletown at 1109 Hamilton. And then in February, enter a fellow named Bill Ojla. Now, Bill Ojla, his name won't be recognized to most of the audience, but he was the general manager of real estate and facilities for the city of Vancouver until July 2018, when he announced one day that he was quitting immediately to go to work for the Aquilinis as their head of real estate. He suddenly intervened in this dispute over the patio in February. He went to one of the bureaucrats after getting a referral from the head of engineering, Jerry Dobrovolny, and another bureaucrat, and started emailing that bureaucrat, having discussions with him to try to lower the temperature and find a resolution. Of course, the resolution that Bill Ojala wanted was one favorable to his current employer, and his current employer is the Aquilinis, no longer City of Vancouver. So 7 months after leaving the employ of City of Vancouver, crossing the street to one of the most important and dynamic development companies in the city, here he is trying to help find a resolution that benefits his company for this money-making patio set up in Yaletown. So there was to and fro for a couple of months. Some of the bureaucrats reminded Bill Ojala and others at the Aquilini companies that there are rules that they have to live by, and that they agreed to live by the rules regarding their permit license, and their permit license did not permit a structure like the one that they built. City Hall essentially did back off. Scott Edwards, in a May 17th email to Aquilini, including Bill Ojala, said they could have an interim license to operate their patio as it was built for the rest of the summer, all the way until the end of October. And, if they needed an extra, extension, that they could possibly get that. But they had some conditions to live under, but not arduous. But the long and short of it is that the Aquilini's restaurant division disregarded the permit that they'd been given and decided to go one up the permit to do their own thing. And there are no consequences, that they were allowed to do this, essentially. And the fear is, according to Dermot Travis from Integrity BC, who I interviewed for the story, that they could turn this into something which could be a precedent setter, that a lot of other smaller operations, smaller businesses, maybe even some residents who deal with Vancouver City Hall inspectors, might just turn around and say, well, treat me like the Aquilinis. If you're going to let them have what they want and not force any consequences for disregarding their permit, well, let me do the same thing. That could be one of the dangers here. So I found out about this. I got a tip, and I filed some FOI requests, and I got the documents back, and that's what formed the basis of my story. So this wasn't something that was on the public agenda at City Council at all. This is something that was behind closed doors until I broke the story this week in the Breaker.news. Well,
the Canucks have pulled, I should say, the Canucks did something as well. If you recall, when they first opened up at GM Place, they had large beers and regular-sized beers, and they charged you $2 more for the large beer. However, it turned out you didn't get any more beer with the large beer. You just got a bigger cup. And nothing was done about that either. They weren't punished for underselling people their alcohol. So it looks like the Canucks, or their ownership, is used to getting away with things.
Well, that's a question people will certainly ask, is there a law for the Aquilinis, and is there a law for everyone else? But you could say that about a lot of big businesses that make or have a history of making in the past political donations. And you can also ask the question, why aren't there any consequences here for that activity? And you can say that for a multitude of businesses, not just the Aquilinis, that we live in this province where it doesn't seem like there is enough justice, and it doesn't seem that there are enough consequences for those who do push the envelope. I guess they sometimes think that when you're in business and wanting to make more money in business, then it might be easier to say, oops, sorry, at the end of the day, and try to, resolve the problem that way. Because we do, again, have a government which seems to be not only the provincial government, but civic government, sometimes even the federal government. It seems like they more or less want to resolve problems instead of go down American-style justice. That seems to be the way it goes. But again, what message does it send to the rest of the public when you're granting a permit to a company? It just so happens to be the Aquilinis who own the Canucks, but you're granting a permit to a company to allow them to make more money, and then they decide that they got a way to do it their own way, beyond the terms of the permit. And then you've got City Hall, which gave the permit, which is not actually enforcing the rules and the laws as such, and not backing up those employees in that department who reminded them of the consequences, instead of going a different direction and more of a resolution or mediation format. But there's also the question here of the former employee of City Hall, now working for the Aquilinis. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no law against that. There is provincially that the provincial government employee can't just walk out the door of the provincial government if that provincial government employee is a senior bureaucrat, and then go walk across the street to a company or an industry that's regulated by the government or that wants to do business with the government, get contracts for the government. That was tightened up by the NDP when it came into power, but nothing of the sort at Vancouver City Hall. So Bill Ojala, the Aquilinis have done nothing wrong when it comes to hiring Bill Ojala out of City Hall. The problem here is City Hall doesn't have the rules that other governments do, either senior governments or governments in other parts of North America, to have a cooling off period so that someone can't just leave the employ of a government body and then go help work at a company that would then have a leg up on others and would be able to deal with an advantage when it comes to negotiating with government, whether it's contracts or purchasing, or buying land, for instance, or building and making applications for a regulatory approval, for instance. This is something that is really on Kennedy Stewart's shoulders. When he was running for mayor, he promised that this was one of his priorities, that he was going to bring in new lobbying legislation at City Hall. He was going to bring in new conflict of interest legislation at City Hall. After he was sworn in as mayor, with the council he has, they basically decided to ask the provincial government to solve those problems for them. Instead of taking the initiative to do a Made in Vancouver law, which they can through the Vancouver Charter, they decided to do it in this fashion. And they decided to ask the provincial government to do it. This isn't something that City of Surrey waited. When Diane Watts was mayor in Surrey, they started their own lobbyist registry. Albeit a lobbyist registry that doesn't really have much in the way of teeth, but a lobbyist registry nonetheless. It was a step forward for a municipality in British Columbia to start to register development lobbyists. Well, nothing of the sort has happened at Vancouver City Hall. They've decided to just write a letter to the provincial government and ask John Horgan and the NDP government to fix it for them. Meanwhile, it goes on. Business as usual, status quo at City of Vancouver, and the citizens of Vancouver have a right to ask, where did this promise go? Why didn't it get enacted? Because we can point to a situation now where a former bureaucrat got involved in a situation that essentially prevented the company that breached the terms of its permit for a patio in Yaletown, wasn't disciplined whatsoever, and got to keep that permit at least to the end of October, and we'll see what happens after that. But some serious questions about City of Vancouver under Kennedy Stewart, who's finished his first year in office.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Aben Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Aben's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at abenresources.com.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, is Western alienation going to be addressed by the Trudeau minority government?
Well, there'll be window dressing, but I don't foresee much happening there. They might get a few liberal names from the past, like Anne McClellan, for instance, but I don't hold out much hope for this, especially with this scenario in government. We've got a very fractious country now. You know, with the rise of the Bloc Québécois, we've got the Conservatives who dominate in Alberta and Saskatchewan. We've got conservative provincial governments in various parts of the country, and we've got the NDP here in BC, which seems to tolerate the Liberals. We've got some more conservatives in provincial governments, along with Greens and the Maritimes. I think we're going into an age when it's going to be quite fractious and very difficult for Justin Trudeau to keep things together. There's Western alienation, there's Quebec alienation, there's international trends. There's a lot of protest movements happening around the world right now. Of course, we're seeing what's happening in the UK with Brexit. There's still the Scottish independence movement in Spain, the Catalonians. A lot of areas of the world say that they're not getting a fair deal from their federal government, and I think that's only going to accelerate here in Western Canada.
Well, the Wexit people, I interviewed Peter Downing, who founded that organization. He says they're going to apply for formal political party status and play a Bloc Québécois, try to get a decent deal for the West.
Good luck on that. The Bloc Québécois, as we remember, was really just a break-off movement from the federal Conservatives. And if you're so that wasn't really a grassroots group. That was a group of MPs who were already established, and who also had allies within the provincial, the Parti Québécois, the provincial separatist movement. So there was already an infrastructure there. I don't think, someone starting a new political party today should, good luck on that to see if they get any traction. We saw what happened with one political party that was founded in the last year, and how it went from having one seat in Parliament to having no seats in Parliament. That's Maxime Bernier and the People's Party. It's a very difficult thing to do, and we've seen how it's happened with smaller political parties, such as the Green Party with Elizabeth May, how she went from one seat this time last year to 2 seats earlier this year to, after the federal election, to 3 seats. Under this current system, the first past the post system, even a party like the Green Party, which does have a large popular vote across the country, only ends up with 3 seats. And you've got a fellow wanting to start a Wexit party. Good luck under the current system, because it's just not going to work. Because what happens is we saw what happened with the federal election. The 2 main parties, the Liberals and Conservatives, still dominate. And, the NDP had, a sizable popular vote in Quebec, for instance, but only ended up with 1 seat. So the election results here under first past the post really don't mirror the wishes of the public, because we've got another situation, which is how we're governed. We're governed under whipped systems, where our members of Parliament, our members of the legislature as well, they don't so much represent us to the leadership or us to the legislature, as they're representing the leader of their party to us locally. They're essentially the local marketing representatives for a leader of a party. And until we solve the system of whips votes, party discipline, to return the power to the people, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. So we need 2 things to happen at the same time to really change the way we're governed. We need to end party discipline so that our elected representatives in each of our constituencies are answerable to the constituents and do what the constituents not do what the leader wants to do to the constituents. We need that solved, and we also need some electoral reform, because first past the post we're seeing is not bringing the real will of the people to the legislature or to Parliament.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, is BC's foreign real estate buyer tax racist?
According to BC Supreme Court Judge Bowden, it is not. He considered the lawsuit that was filed by Jing Lee, who is a former student who came to Canada to study in the University of Saskatchewan and moved to Burnaby. And in the summer of 2016, she bought a condo for almost $600,000 in Langley, just in time for the BC Liberals to slap that foreign buyer tax. It was 15% then, and now it's 20% under the NDP. She is a Chinese citizen and has not made moves to become a permanent resident, and as such is a target of this tax. And she was assessed another $80,000 or so on top of the purchase price, and she thought she was being discriminated against, and hired some lawyers, had 4 lawyers to be exact, to fight this in court, in BC Supreme Court, on constitutional grounds. That her case was built on that this was discriminatory against a recognizable ethnic group, her being ethnic Chinese, and that this was not to be tolerated, not to be allowed by the courts. But the BC Supreme Court judge looked at it and said, well, for the wider good of the community, this is to solve a problem that's been identified by the legislature. He had expert witnesses, and expert witnesses that also show that this is a popular measure, according to some opinion polls, and that it was to help solve a major problem in society right now in British Columbia, which is affordable housing, to bring down the prices so people here could afford to find housing. People who are citizens can afford to find housing as well as permanent residents. So the judge looked at all the facts and looked at all the expert opinions and said that no, this is not discriminatory on grounds that would breach the Constitution. Not at all. That this is something that is needed for all in society. And in fact, there are a lot of people who are of multiple ethnic groups who have come to Canada to live in Canada, to become Canadian citizens, who are also suffering by this, much more than perhaps the plaintiff in the case. So this has reaffirmed the BC Liberal policy, which of course was adopted by the NDP when they came to power, and of course the NDP increased the tax. And this also bodes well for the promise that the Trudeau Liberals made to have a national tax on absentee landlords and foreign landlords. We'll see what shape that takes when they get back into Parliament. Of course, it's the federal Liberals, and they got reelected despite breaking a number of promises. We'll see if they hold to this promise. Promise that would be popular in the Metro Vancouver area and the Metro Toronto area, definitely, because those are two markets with very high concentrations of foreign ownership and very high concentrations of foreign sales. We'll see if they do that, but now they have the ability to craft legislation, because the court here in British Columbia has said that this tax is a fair tax that is intended to solve the affordable housing problem, and it is not discriminatory.
What's happening with the BC money laundering inquiry?
Well, right now we have a series of public meetings. There's one actually happening November 7th in Richmond, The Cullen Commission inquiry website has all the particulars about that. So right now they're in the meeting phase, public meeting phase, where members of the public are invited to come and tell them what they think of the inquiry and tell them the stories. And perhaps some of the evidence brought forward and the anecdotes brought forward by the public to these public meetings could help inform the public inquiry as it does its work, or maybe even some members of the public that actually come to these meetings could end up becoming witnesses for the public inquiry when it starts its hearings sometime in spring 2020. In the meantime, there was a decision by Austin Cullen, the BC Supreme Court Justice, who is the commissioner of this inquiry, to give full standing to Jim Lightbody, the CEO of BC Lottery Corporation, but not give full standing to Fred Pinnock, the former RCMP officer who headed up the illegal gambling enforcement team, the group that was disbanded by Rich Coleman back in 2009, despite the warnings that organized crime was infiltrating BC casinos. So you had this decision that came down last week. This means that Jim Lightbody, the head of CEO, will have his own lawyer to plead his case so that he can testify, and this lawyer will also be able to cross-examine other witnesses throughout the proceedings. Not so much for Fred Pinnock, who is the whistleblower. He's one of the reasons why this inquiry is happening, because he was a whistleblower that couldn't take it anymore when the provincial government decided to shut down that office, that RCMP investigation group, despite the evidence they brought forward that said that there's loan sharks and money launderers already in the casinos, and it's only going to get worse if you don't do anything about it. Well, here we are in 2019, and we have to have a public inquiry to get to the bottom of it. And there's been various arrests and court hearings in other cases that tie in with the casino money laundering. So that's where the hearings are now. We're expecting another hearing in November when Brad Damaris, who is Vice President of Security and Casino Operations for BC Lottery Corporation, he asks for standing in this hearing as well. And we'll see some movement in the spring when this gets underway. This is on a tight timeline. They are supposed to give an interim report by the end of next year, and then by mid-2021 is the deadline for the final report on this money laundering public inquiry. I still think it's rather optimistic of them to schedule it the way they did. The NDP wants to get it done well before the 2021 fall provincial election. I think it might take longer. Other inquiries on other cases have taken much more time, and I think once they get into the meat and potatoes of this problem and realize how big it is and how it extends not just beyond, not just in casinos and real estate in Richmond, but it extends province-wide, and it probably extends into areas that no one can conceive of today. I think once they get into that, they're going to need more time.
Who's the front runner to build the Broadway transit corridor?
Well, right now we don't quite know. There's a short list of companies. An Italian company that was substituted in after SNC-Lavalin dropped out back in July. There is Kiewit, and there's also Acciona, the Spanish company, which is paired with Aecon, and also in another bidding process. But what happened with this was that this was all decided behind closed doors, as it normally is. But the situation is we don't quite know about the scoring for this, the ranking for this. A committee of bureaucrats got together, and they were the ones that decided the short list. They're supposedly more than arm's length away from the political arena, but they decided to put the short list as they did, including SNC-Lavalin on the short list. Even though there were corruption allegations, they put SNC-Lavalin on the short list, which was announced back in June. And the problem here is that I've asked for the report of this committee, and this committee will not release the full scoring table. We don't know what the points were that were awarded to the various companies, including SNC-Lavalin, that were bidding for this. And this is also a problem because we've seen what happened in Ottawa, where they went beyond the short list. They got to the final procurement, And that's when they decided to give SNC-Lavalin an LRT contract, $1.6 billion LRT contract. And it was only leaked out to the CBC in Ottawa that there was a problem with the SNC-Lavalin bid, that they didn't meet the threshold in the scoring for the technical evaluation. All the other companies were in the mid-80s, mid-80%, whereas SNC-Lavalin didn't make the 70% threshold, yet we're still given the contract based on the lowest bid. And obviously, when you're talking about taxpayer dollars, the lowest bid has to come into play and be a major factor in awarding a contract. But this is another example where the lowest bid wasn't really balanced with the technical requirements, because now there's some severe questions in Ottawa if they chose the right company, and will they end up paying more if mistakes happen along the way that confirm that SNC-Lavalin was not the right company from a technical standpoint to choose. So that's another reason why we should have more transparency when there is shortlisting and procurement of companies. We should know who scored well and scored best, and the bureaucrats that make these decisions and the politicians who rubber stamp these decisions should be accountable for the work they do on these files.
Bob, really 10 years ago, almost to the day that we started the Olympic torch towards Vancouver's big games that probably were amongst the most successful winter games ever.
Well, October 30th of 2009, that's when the Olympic flame touched down in the Canadian Forces jet in Victoria. It flew from Athens, stopped along the way in Scotland and Iceland for refueling. It was lit October 22nd by the light of the sun in ancient Olympia, Greece. I was there for that event, and after being run around Greece for the better part of a week, it was put on that plane with various Vancouver Olympics dignitaries, politicians, and others, and landed in Victoria on that October 30th of 2009. And they had an event at the Vancouver International Airport with Premier Gordon Campbell and Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Mayor Gregor Robertson. And they then whisked the flame, which was in a miner's lamp, to downtown Victoria. There was a First Nations ceremony. It was brought in on First Nations canoes. And there was an event happening at the legislature where Darlene Poole, the widow of Jack Poole, the Vannock Vannock chairman, who had died the previous week of pancreatic cancer, she helped light a special cauldron for the torch relay outside the legislature, and that's when various dignitaries, including Simon Whitfield, started the torch relay, which went from October 30th of 2009 to February 12th of 2010. They took the longest route possible to get from Victoria to Vancouver, and it started on this day back in 2009. It was not without controversy. There were various protest groups in Victoria who were showing their displeasure for the games and saying that the money could have been spent much better elsewhere in healthcare and education instead of building Olympic venues and infrastructure and spending so much money on security. They felt the money could have been spent much better elsewhere. And they held a street protest, a Halloween-style protest. Some of them were dressed up as zombies and in other costumes with signs and noisemakers. They did force the torch relay procession to have to be rerouted a few times. And around Oak Bay and other parts of Victoria. It did start to rain later that night, but there were no major security incidents, although we did find out some of the truth of what happened the next week, because Jamie Graham, the Victoria police chief, appeared at a security conference and spilled some of the beans about some of the secrets. He did say that there was a case where someone had T-boned one of the Victoria police vehicles that was escorting torch relay runners, He also did spill the beans back then about one of the secrets he had, which was to spy on the protesters, that a police officer was actually an undercover officer, an undercover operative, driving the bus that the protesters came to Vancouver Island on. Picked the protesters up in Vancouver and took them over on the ferry to Victoria. And that was something that Jamie Graham, the Victoria Police Chief, boasted about at a security conference. And I broke that story. It got national news, national attention. And it also got him in some hot water because a citizen in Victoria complained to the police complaints commissioner and said that, well, that was wrong. He put a police officer in danger, and also he used a different kind of technique to spy on protesters that may not have been compliant with all the laws. And the police complaints commissioner did uphold that complaint and say that Jamie Graham should not have done that. Of course, Jamie Graham initially tried to say that it was all just a joke. That was his defense initially, but eventually he was given a slap on the wrist for that tactic, which he was proud about at the time.
Bob, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, publisher of TheBreaker.news, his website, TheBreaker.ca. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Find us on YouTube at Talk Digital Network, on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.